In the annals of modern history, few stories are as chilling as that of Aum Shinrikyo, a Japanese doomsday cult that shocked the world with a horrific act of terror on the Tokyo subway system. Today, on History Unveiled, we journey from the origins of a seemingly spiritual yoga class to a cult capable of manufacturing chemical weapons, and we examine the ideology and legacy of a group that forever altered Japan's sense of security. Our story begins in 1984. In a small one-room apartment in Tokyo's vibrant Shibuya district, a pharmacist named Chizo Matsumoto began teaching yoga and meditation classes. Unbeknownst to his future followers, this modest venture would soon evolve into a far more sinister organization. In his classes, Matsumoto, who later renamed himself Shoko Asahara, blended elements of yoga with an eclectic mix of Eastern spiritual practices. At the outset, the group was known as Aum Shinrikyo no Kai, which roughly translates to Society of Divine Ascetics. Asahara's early teachings focused on self-discipline, meditation, and developing latent psychic abilities. The promise was alluring. With enough dedication, one could unlock hidden spiritual powers and, ultimately, salvation. For many young Japanese, especially graduates from elite universities, disillusioned by a conformist society, the message resonated. During these early years, the group functioned like a modern spiritual school. Its appeal lay in its promise to combine traditional Buddhist ideas with the mysticism of Hinduism, all filtered through Asahara's idiosyncratic vision. By drawing on elements of Indian and Tibetan Buddhism, along with references to Christian millennialism and even the prophecies of Nostradamus, Asahara constructed a narrative in which the world was on the brink of an apocalypse, a final battle that only his followers could survive. In August 1989, a turning point arrived. The Tokyo Metropolitan Government granted the group official status as a religious corporation. This decision, designed to protect religious freedom in post-war Japan, granted the organization tax breaks and an aura of legitimacy. Almost overnight, what began as a fringe yoga school exploded in popularity. Membership skyrocketed from a mere score of people to nearly 20,000 by 1992. The cult's net worth surged, from less than 430 million yen to over 100 billion yen in just 6 years. With these resources came an influx of highly educated members. Bureaucrats, scientists, and even personnel from the self-defense forces began to join the ranks. This rapid growth, however, was not without controversy. As the cult became a magnet for Japan's elite, concerns mounted over its secretive practices. Reports began emerging of aggressive recruitment, the forced donation of money, and even allegations that members who attempted to leave were subject to intimidation, and in some cases, murder. In February 1989, a member who tried to break away was reportedly strangled by cult operatives. And just months later, in November 1989, the group was implicated in the murder of Satsumi Sakamoto, a lawyer representing victims of the cult, along with his family. For Asahara and his inner circle, these acts were justified by a doctrine they called Poa. In their twisted worldview, those with bad karma were doomed to eternal suffering in hell, and it was their sacred duty to eliminate such souls, thus saving them by killing them before they could accrue any further sin. Aum Shinrikyo's ideology is as complex as it is dangerous. At its core, the cult was a syncretic blend of various religious traditions. It borrowed heavily from early Indian Buddhism and Tibetan practices, while also incorporating elements of Hinduism, most notably the worship of the god Shiva, revered as the destroyer. Asahara claimed that through his teachings, he could help his followers achieve enlightenment in this very life. Central to his doctrine was the belief in an impending apocalypse. Asahara prophesied a catastrophic global conflict, a Third World War, instigated in part by the United States, that would culminate in nuclear Armageddon. He declared himself to be the sole enlightened master, even comparing himself to Christ and asserting that he alone could absorb the sins of the world. His writings and speeches were laced with millenarian fervor, promising that only his followers would survive the coming destruction and then rebuild a new society. To his disciples, Asahara's words were gospel. The cult's literature was filled with references to secret initiations, mystical rites, and the transfer of spiritual power from the guru to his followers. Advanced members underwent intense initiation ceremonies, often involving the use of hallucinogens like LSD or extreme meditative practices, designed to transmit Asahara's spiritual energy. These practices, combined with strict discipline and isolation from outside influences, forged a powerful bond among members. The allure of Aum was further enhanced by its promise of salvation. In a society where traditional religions were seen as outdated or irrelevant, Asahara's radical message provided a seemingly alternative path. A way to escape the mundane and the materialistic aspects of modern life, and to prepare for an inevitable end-of-days scenario. As the cult's membership and financial resources expanded, so too did its ambitions. What had begun as a spiritual movement soon morphed into a clandestine effort to develop weapons of mass destruction. By the early 1990s, Aum Shinrikyo was not only studying ancient scriptures, it was conducting secret experiments with chemical and biological agents. The cult's first forays into weaponry involved the synthesis of nerve agents. In the early 1990s, under the direction of senior members like Seiichi Endo and Masami Tsuchiya, Aum set up secret laboratories and production facilities. Their goal was nothing short of producing enough toxic gas to kill millions. In one instance, the group attempted to produce sarin, a potent nerve agent originally developed during World War II. Drawing on published methods and repurposing equipment from legitimate businesses, Aum managed to synthesize small batches of the poison. However, their early experiments were riddled with technical challenges. In one of the first attempts, the cult tried to create botulinum toxin using crude fermentation methods. Soil samples from the Ishikari River were used in large fermenters, but the resulting product was impure and failed to cause the desired effects. Despite repeated failures and setbacks, Aum persisted. Their ambition only grew with time. By late 1992, Aum began producing sarin in larger quantities. Their secret facility in Kamakuishiki, located at the foot of Mount Fuji, was outfitted with state-of-the-art mixing flasks and chemical reactors, equipment purchased through shell companies. In parallel, the cult even dabbled in biological weapons. They experimented with anthrax, botulinum toxin, and even explored the possibility of using agents like the Ebola virus. Although these biological programs largely failed, due to technical difficulties and the use of ineffective strains, the mere attempt underscored the extent of Aum's dangerous ambitions. Perhaps the most infamous act of weaponized terror came on March 20, 1995. On the morning of March 20, 1995, during the rush hour in Tokyo, 5 Aum Shinrikyo operatives carried out an attack that would forever scar the city, and indeed, the world. In a coordinated operation, the attackers boarded 5 trains on 3 subway lines. They carried small plastic bags, innocuously wrapped to resemble lunch boxes or bottled drinks. Just before the trains stopped at certain stations, the assailants punctured the bags with umbrellas, releasing liquid sarin into the confined spaces of the trains. The effects were immediate and catastrophic. Within minutes, commuters began exhibiting symptoms of nerve agent poisoning, myoses, constricted pupils, intense pain, difficulty breathing, and, in some cases, loss of consciousness. The attack claimed the lives of 13 people and injured over 6,000 others, with many victims left with lasting psychological and physical scars. Investigations would later reveal that the attack was not a spontaneous act of madness but a calculated operation. According to police accounts, Asahara had been tipped off that a large-scale raid on the cult's facilities was imminent. In a bid to divert attention and perhaps to force his apocalyptic vision into reality sooner, he ordered the subway attack. Instead of completely overwhelming the system with a more lethal dose, the sarin used was of only about 30% purity, a factor that, while still deadly, may have inadvertently limited the death toll. The aftermath was a scene of chaos and grief. Hospitals were inundated with patients suffering from the effects of the nerve agent. Emergency services worked around the clock, and for weeks after the attack, the city grappled with the fear that such an incident might happen again. In the wake of the Tokyo subway sarin attack, the full extent of Aum Shinrikyo's operations was exposed. Police raids were launched across the country. At the cult's headquarters in Kamakuishiki, authorities discovered not only chemical weapons but also explosive materials, a Russian military helicopter, and laboratories that indicated a massive, coordinated effort to produce weapons of mass destruction. The government's response was swift and unyielding. Over 150 cult members were arrested in the immediate aftermath, and investigations soon uncovered evidence linking Aum to previous incidents, including the Matsumoto sarin attack in 1994. The revelation that a secretive religious group had been manufacturing chemical and biological weapons on a near-industrial scale shook Japanese society to its core. Public opinion in Japan, once tolerant of new religious movements, turned sharply against Aum. The cult's official status as a religious organization was revoked, and legal measures were introduced to tighten oversight on groups suspected of subversive activities. Despite these measures, the cult continued to operate under the constitutional guarantee of freedom of religion, albeit under strict surveillance. In the following years, the leadership of Aum was dismantled through a series of high-profile trials. Shoko Asahara was arrested on May 16, 1995, and, after an 8-year trial, he was sentenced to death for his role in orchestrating the subway attack as well as other crimes, including the Matsumoto incident and the murder of Satsumi Sakamoto. In a series of grim judicial decisions, 13 top members were eventually sentenced to death, and over the next 2 decades, Japan carried out several executions. But the story did not end with the fall of Aum Shinrikyo. Even as the core leadership was imprisoned or executed, the cult adapted. In January 2000, in an effort to distance itself from its violent past, Aum rebranded itself as Aleph. Under the new name, the group attempted to dispel its image as a terrorist organization. Aleph publicly apologized for the subway attack, established a compensation fund for the victims, and even removed some of the more controversial religious texts related to Vajrayana Buddhist doctrines that had, in the eyes of many, justified its violent actions. Yet, despite these superficial changes, many of the cult's core beliefs remained. Internal divisions soon emerged. In 2007, a splinter group led by Fumihiro Joyu broke away from Aleph to form Hikari no Wa, or Circle of Light. This faction claimed it would focus more on the spiritual roots of the movement and distance itself from the violent legacy of Asahara, yet public skepticism persisted. The Japanese authorities have maintained strict surveillance over both Aleph and Hikari no Wa. Even today, while the groups no longer openly engage in violent activities, they are still considered potentially dangerous. The Public Security Intelligence Agency continues to monitor their activities, and both groups remain on lists of organizations under state watch. Beyond the immediate horrors of the subway attack, Aum Shinrikyo has left a deep psychological scar on Japanese society. For decades, Japan had been known as one of the safest and most orderly countries in the world. The very idea that a small cult, composed largely of well-educated individuals, could plan and execute such an act of terror was both shocking and disorienting. Scholars and psychologists have since examined the cult's internal dynamics. Studies indicate that Aum's recruitment methods were highly effective in exploiting the vulnerabilities of young, disaffected Japanese. With limited exposure to the major religious traditions, many youths were attracted to the radical and apocalyptic promise of Aum. The rigorous practices, including sleep deprivation, intense group activities, and controlled exposure to information, created an environment in which critical thinking was stifled, and blind loyalty to Asahara and his ideology was fostered. This phenomenon, sometimes described as groupthink, or even conformist aggression, played a crucial role in the cult's ability to carry out violent actions. Members were not born killers, rather, they were educated and otherwise ordinary individuals who, under the influence of a charismatic leader and an insular community, came to believe that their violent acts were a necessary, even noble, part of a larger cosmic plan. The psychological aftermath of the attacks also reverberated through the survivors and even those indirectly affected. The shock of the event, combined with the intense media coverage and ongoing public debates about religious freedom versus security, has had lasting effects on Japan's collective psyche. Today, the story of Aum Shinrikyo serves as both a cautionary tale and the subject of intense academic study, a grim reminder of how extremist ideologies can take root in even the most unexpected places. More than 2 decades after the Tokyo subway sarin attack, Aum Shinrikyo, now known as Aleph, is a shadow of its former self, but it has not vanished completely. Under constant state surveillance, the group continues to operate in Japan, albeit with a significantly reduced membership. Official estimates suggest around 1,650 members remain in Japan, with a few hundred in Russia. The rebranding to Aleph was an attempt to shed the cult's violent past, and in some respects, it has succeeded in mitigating public outrage. Aleph now publicly disavows the violent actions of the 1990s, has established compensation funds for the victims, and claims to focus on spiritual rather than militant pursuits. Nonetheless, many observers remain wary. The core doctrines that once justified the use of violence persist in modified form, and splinter groups such as Hikari no Wa, though also under surveillance, continue to draw suspicion. In recent years, there have been occasional incidents that remind us that the legacy of Aum is far from over. The Japanese police have continued to monitor the groups closely, and any unusual activities are met with swift intervention. Moreover, the psychological trauma inflicted on the victims and the broader society has not easily faded. The memories of that fateful morning continue to influence public debate on issues of religious freedom, state oversight, and counterterrorism. The story of Aum Shinrikyo is a multifaceted one. It is at once a tale of charismatic leadership, of the perils of unchecked ideology, and of a society forced to confront its own vulnerabilities. The cult's transformation from a small yoga school to a producer of chemical weapons is a stark illustration of how extremist ideas can escalate under the right conditions. What lessons can we draw from the tragic history of Aum Shinrikyo? First and foremost, it is a reminder that terrorism is not confined to political or military groups. Sometimes, it is born from a toxic blend of spiritual ambition and radical ideology. The cult's ability to recruit educated, middle-class individuals shows that extremism can flourish even among those we might assume to be well-informed and rational. From a counterterrorism perspective, the response to the Tokyo subway sarin attack led to sweeping changes in how governments approach domestic terrorism. Japan introduced new laws to monitor and, where possible, restrict the activities of groups deemed a threat to public order. At the same time, the incident sparked global debates on the balance between religious freedom and national security, a debate that continues to resonate today. In academic circles, Aum Shinrikyo has become a case study for understanding group dynamics, the role of charismatic authority, and the psychological mechanisms behind radicalization. Researchers continue to analyze how the cult's rigid structure, its apocalyptic rhetoric, and its emphasis on secret knowledge contributed to its capacity for violence. These studies not only help us understand the past but also inform strategies to prevent future extremism. Looking forward, while the direct threat posed by Aum Shinrikyo has diminished, the underlying issues remain. The digital age has introduced new arenas for radicalization, and the methods of recruitment and indoctrination have evolved. The legacy of Aum serves as a potent reminder that vigilance is essential. Societies must invest in education, promote critical thinking, and ensure that oversight mechanisms are robust enough to detect and deter emerging threats, whether they come from militant religious groups, ideological extremists, or other unconventional actors. The saga of Aum Shinrikyo is one of transformation, terror, and enduring tragedy. What began in a modest Tokyo apartment as a yoga class quickly spiraled into one of the most infamous terrorist campaigns in modern history. Through its apocalyptic vision and radical doctrines, the cult not only claimed lives but also altered the very fabric of Japanese society. For many, the memories of that day still linger, etched into the collective consciousness as a reminder of both human vulnerability and the potential for extremism to emerge from unexpected quarters. While the organization has rebranded itself as Aleph and now operates under the watchful eyes of the authorities, the questions it raised about faith, power, and the nature of modern terror remain as relevant today as they were 3 decades ago. As we close today's chapter on Aum Shinrikyo, we are left with sobering lessons. Extremism, in any form, is a multifaceted threat, a challenge that demands not only security measures but also a deep understanding of the psychological and social forces that drive individuals toward radicalization. The history of Aum is a testament to the dangers of unchecked ideology, and it serves as a call to remain vigilant in the face of any movement that seeks to exploit faith for violence. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the history of Aum Shinrikyo. If you found this video insightful, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more in-depth historical investigations on History Unveiled. Let us know in the comments what you think about the legacy of Aum and how you believe societies can learn from such tragedies. Stay curious, stay vigilant, and as always, thank you for watching.